I'm not the type of person who scares easily. I work night shifts at a small diner on the edge of town, and walking home alone at 2 in the morning is just part of my life. You get used to the quiet, the way the streetlights hum, and even the occasional drunk shouting at nothing on the corner. But what happened one night last winter? I'll never get used to that. It was a Thursday, bitterly cold, with that sharp air that feels like it's cutting into your skin. I'd finished wiping down the counter at the diner, locked up, and pulled my scarf higher over my face. The streets were empty, except for the occasional car passing in the distance. My apartment building was only about a 15-minute walk from work, a plain 3-story place with thin walls and a single entrance at the front. The building wasn't in a bad neighborhood exactly, but it wasn't somewhere you'd leave your door unlocked either. I'd lived there for 2 years without much trouble, aside from my upstairs neighbor's music at odd hours and the occasional smell of cigarette smoke in the hallway. That night, I got home just before 2:30. My fingers were numb by the time I pulled my keys from my pocket. I let myself in through the front door of the building, the lock sticking the way it always did. The hallway inside was warm but dim, lit by a single flickering bulb near the stairs. I remember thinking how quiet it was, even quieter than usual. No TV noise, no creaking floorboards from the neighbor upstairs. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and walked to my apartment at the end of the hall. The hall light up here was out completely, so I had to use my phone screen to see the keyhole. When I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me out of habit, kicked off my shoes, and hung my coat. My apartment isn't much: a living room, tiny kitchen, small bedroom, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it's home. I heated up some leftover soup, sat on the couch, and let the quiet settle around me. There's something almost peaceful about being awake when the whole building is asleep. But that night, the quiet felt heavier somehow, like the walls were listening. I brushed it off, figuring I was just overtired. I didn't go to bed right away. I was scrolling on my phone, letting the soup go cold on the coffee table when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A soft, slow creak. My first thought was that it came from upstairs, but then I realized it wasn't above me. It was right outside my apartment door, holding my breath. Another sound followed, the faintest shuffle, like the weight of someone shifting their feet. My apartment is at the very end of the hall, so no one passes by unless they live there. My only neighbor on this floor was an older man named Frank, and he worked nights driving a delivery truck. I knew for a fact he wasn't home. I turned down the volume on my phone until it was silent. The shuffling stopped. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, listening so hard my ears ached. Nothing. I told myself it was probably the building settling, and then I heard the handle on my door rattle. It wasn't loud, just a slow, testing movement. Not a knock, not even someone trying to open it fully, just enough to see if it was locked. My stomach tightened. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept next to the couch. The rattling stopped again. I crept over to the peephole. The hallway was pitch black. I could barely make out the faint outline of the stairwell at the far end. Whoever had touched my door wasn't standing there anymore. I backed away slowly, trying to think. If I called the police, what would I even say? Hi! Someone maybe touched my doorknob? They'd think I was paranoid. Still, I left my phone in my pocket, just in case. For the next 10 minutes, nothing happened. I sat on the couch, bat in my lap, straining to hear. Eventually, I decided I was overreacting. I put the bat back and went to brush my teeth, determined to just get some sleep. I had just turned off the bathroom light when I heard another noise. This time it wasn't at the door, it was inside my apartment. A soft click. I froze in the doorway to my bedroom. I know the sound of my own light switch. It came from the kitchen. My mind started racing. Had I left the light on and it burned out? No. I'd been sitting in the living room with the kitchen light off the entire time. I grabbed the bat again, my hands slick with sweat. I could feel my own pulse in my throat. The kitchen is just off the living room, separated by a small counter. From where I stood, I couldn't see the whole thing, just the edge of the counter and the fridge. I inched forward, trying not to breathe too loud. The kitchen light was on. I swear to you, I never touched it. I scanned the room, the bat trembling in my grip. No one. Cabinets closed, window locked. My heart was hammering, but I forced myself to check the rest of the apartment. Bedroom, empty. Bathroom, empty. Closet, empty. I turned the kitchen light off again, but I didn't put the bat down this time. I decided there was no way I was sleeping. I sat on the couch, every muscle tight, listening. Around 4 in the morning, I heard it again, the slow creak from the hallway. This time, it didn't stop at my door. I could hear soft footsteps moving past, then down the stairs. I waited until I was sure whoever it was had left before daring to look through the peephole again. Nothing. By sunrise, I felt drained and shaky. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, but deep down I knew I hadn't. I called my landlord and asked if anyone had been in the building overnight. He said no. I mentioned the hallway light being out and asked if it could be fixed. He promised to send someone. That night, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. The thought of walking back into a dark, silent building made my skin crawl. But the next night, I had no choice. Bills don't pay themselves. When I got home, the hallway light upstairs was still out. I walked quickly to my apartment, locked the door, and tried to convince myself lightning wouldn't strike twice. It did. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not my own, not through the walls. It was in the room. I reached for the bat under my bed, moving as slowly as I could. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and that's when I saw it, a silhouette in the doorway, tall and still, just standing there. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was in bed, the next I was swinging the bat with everything I had. It connected with something solid, and the figure stumbled back into the living room. I ran after it, screaming, swinging again. This time I missed, and the person bolted for the door. By the time I got there, they were gone, the front door to the building swinging shut. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The police came, took a statement, and found nothing. No forced entry, no fingerprints. I changed the locks the next day, but I never shook the feeling that he still had a way in. I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs, but until last fall, I never thought twice about them. I was traveling for work, supposed to be in town for 3 nights. Hotels were booked solid because of some huge conference, so I went for the next best thing, a private room in a 2-story house listed on Airbnb. The pictures looked nice enough. Hardwood floors, clean white bedding, a small desk, and a cozy little reading chair by the window. The host's profile said his name was Daniel, and his reviews were mostly 5 stars. The listing mentioned that the host lived in the house too, but gave guests full privacy. There was one line I barely noticed when I booked. The basement is off limits. No explanation, no photos of it, nothing. I arrived late, around 9:30 p.m. It had been raining for hours, and the streets were slick under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly residential. When I pulled up, the house looked just like the pictures. A narrow driveway, front porch light glowing, a welcome mat that said "Stay a while." Daniel answered the door right away, like he'd been waiting. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with neatly combed dark hair and a friendly smile. He wore a sweatshirt and jeans, barefoot. His voice was calm, almost too calm, when he greeted me. He showed me around quickly: living room, kitchen, my room upstairs, and the shared bathroom. Everything looked clean, and he kept making little jokes, which put me at ease. When he mentioned the basement being just for storage, I nodded like it was nothing. The first couple of hours were normal. I unpacked, made some tea, and sat at the desk answering emails. Around midnight, I was about to go to bed when I heard something, a faint metallic clinking sound. At first, I thought it was the rain hitting the gutters, but then I realized it was coming from inside the house. It was rhythmic. I stepped out into the hallway and listened. The sound was coming from downstairs. I figured maybe Daniel was doing dishes late or fixing something in the kitchen. I went back to my room, shut the door, and tried to ignore it. The sound stopped a few minutes later, and I eventually fell asleep. The second night, the rain had stopped, but the air was damp and heavy. I'd gone out for dinner, came back around 10:15, and Daniel wasn't in the living room. The lights downstairs were off. I figured he was in his room. I showered, got into bed, and was scrolling on my phone when I heard it again. Clink, clink, clink. But this time, it was louder. I sat up and turned off my phone screen, just listening. It was coming from below me, the basement. I don't know why, but a chill ran through me. Something about the steady rhythm didn't sound like tools or housework. It sounded deliberate. I stepped into the hallway and crept downstairs. The main floor was dark except for a small light in the kitchen. I padded quietly toward it, trying not to make the floorboards creak. That's when I saw it. The basement door at the far end of the hallway was cracked open about an inch. A faint yellow light glowed from below, and the metallic clinking was clearer now. Clink, pause, clink. I leaned slightly, peering through the gap. I couldn't see much, just the top of the stairs and the light spilling up. And then the sound stopped. The silence was sudden, heavy. I stepped back, heart thudding. From the basement, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming toward the stairs. I bolted quietly to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water from the counter, and acted like I'd just gotten up for a drink. A moment later, Daniel appeared from the basement. He was wearing different clothes, a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, and his hair looked damp, like he'd been sweating. "Oh," he said, smiling faintly. "Couldn't sleep?" I forced a laugh and held up the glass. "Yeah, just needed some water." He nodded, walked past me without another word, and locked the basement door behind him. I remember hearing the click of the lock very clearly. I didn't go back to bed right away. I stayed up reading, telling myself I was overthinking things. Around 3 a.m. I was drifting off when I heard a different noise. Not clinking this time, a muffled voice. It was coming from the floor below. I held my breath. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. A voice, but I couldn't make out the words. It was low, hoarse. I slid out of bed, crouched near the floor, and pressed my ear to it. It was clearer now. Someone was talking, but not to me. And then a soft cry, a woman's voice. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick note to myself. Something is wrong here. Basement locked. Voices. Need to leave ASAP. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed my bag quietly, tiptoed down the stairs, and left the key on the kitchen counter. I didn't even bother texting Daniel. I drove straight to a coffee shop a few blocks away and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. I opened the Airbnb app and canceled the remaining nights, citing personal reasons. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, while scrolling through local news, I saw a headline, "Man arrested after woman found in basement of rental home." It was the same street, same house, same smiling host. They didn't release the details, but they didn't have to. Now every time I book an Airbnb, I check every single locked door, and if the host says it's just for storage, I leave. Working nights at a gas station in the middle of nowhere is boring most of the time. It's quiet, it smells faintly of old coffee and motor oil, and you get used to the hum of the coolers and the occasional moth slapping against the windows. I'd been doing the job for about 6 months. The place sat off a 2-lane highway surrounded by empty fields, 30 miles from the nearest real town. It was one of those small stations with just 2 pumps, a tiny convenience store, and a flickering neon sign that buzzed all night. I worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift alone. No manager breathing down my neck, no coworkers to make small talk with. Usually the only people who came in were truckers looking for coffee, locals who couldn't sleep, or the occasional lost tourist asking for directions. But one night last winter, I learned how quickly quiet can turn into dangerous. It was a Tuesday, dead slow. By 1 a.m., I'd had exactly 3 customers. I was leaning on the counter scrolling through my phone when I noticed headlights approaching down the highway. The car slowed, turned into the lot, and pulled up to the far pump, the one furthest from the store. That was unusual. Most people picked the pump closest to the door. I watched through the window as the driver sat there without getting out. The engine idled. After a full minute, the door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up and his hands shoved into the pockets. Even from a distance, I could tell he wasn't in any rush. He didn't start pumping gas right away. Instead, he stood there, scanning the lot, then looking directly at the store windows. A weird prickling ran through me. I stepped back from the glass so I wouldn't be as visible. Eventually, he started the pump, but after just a few seconds, he hung it back up, barely enough gas to get anywhere. Then he walked slowly toward the store. When he came in, the little bell above the door gave its cheerful ding, but his expression didn't match it. He didn't say hi, didn't look at the shelves. He just walked straight to the counter, stopping a little too close. "You open all night?" he asked. His voice was flat, low. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded slowly, eyes roaming over the store like he was taking inventory. Anyone else here? Nope, I said. That seemed to make him smile slightly, not a friendly smile. He reached into his hoodie pocket. My heart rate spiked, but he only pulled out a crumpled bill and set it on the counter. Pack of Marlboros. I turned to grab the cigarettes. When I looked back, he was still watching me in that slow, calculating way. I rang him up, gave him his change, and he didn't leave right away. He just stood there. You get many customers this time of night? He asked. Not really, I said. Mostly truckers. Another slow nod. Then he pocketed the cigarettes and walked out without saying goodbye. I watched from the window as he got into his car. But instead of leaving, he drove to the side of the building, the blind spot where the cameras don't reach, and turned off his headlights. I couldn't see him anymore. My hands were sweating. Something about the way he'd asked those questions, the way he'd barely pumped gas, it didn't feel right. I went to the back office and locked the door. From there, I could see part of the lot through a small side window. His car was still there, engine running, no lights. Minutes dragged by. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That some guy bought cigarettes and was sitting in his car? They'd take an hour to get out here anyway. Then I heard it, the creak of the back door. The back door is supposed to be locked at all times, but the latch sticks, and sometimes if you pull hard enough. I grabbed the heavy flashlight we keep behind the counter and stayed in the office, holding my breath. Soft footsteps came closer, moving through the stockroom. I crouched behind the desk, phone in hand, and started dialing 911. But before I could hit call, the footsteps stopped. Right outside the office door, the handle turned slowly, locked. There was a pause, then a single knock. Not a polite knock, just one sharp tap. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Store's closed in the back, I said loudly, trying to sound steady. Silence. Then the footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate. I waited and waited. Finally, I peeked through the side window. The car was gone. I stayed in the office until sunrise, every creak making me jump. When my shift ended, I checked the back door. The latch had fresh scratches around it, like someone had been trying to pry it open with a tool. I told my boss. He shrugged and said we should probably get that fixed. 2 weeks later, I heard about a clerk at another gas station 40 miles away who'd been found tied up in the back after a robbery. The suspect's description? Tall, dark hoodie, hands in his pockets. Being an emergency doctor in a small-town hospital means you get used to working with less staff, less equipment, and a lot less sleep. Our hospital had just 8 ER beds, 1 operating room, and a skeleton crew at night. Most nights were quiet, maybe a car accident or two, or a drunk who slipped and split his head open. But the night the blackout hit, nothing about it was normal. It was late February, snow piled up along the streets, the sky low and heavy. I was halfway through my 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. We had 3 patients, a teenager with a sprained wrist, an older man with chest pain, and a woman waiting on stitches. At 1:14 a.m., the lights went out. It wasn't just the ER, the whole hospital went dark. For a moment, the only sound was the heart monitors flatlining into a chorus of high-pitched alarms. Then the generator kicked in, flooding the room with a dull yellow glow, except it didn't feel right. Normally, the backup generator powers the entire ER, the hall lights, and the security doors. But this time, only half the lights flickered on, and some equipment stayed dead. I looked toward the nurses' station. Where's maintenance? They're on their way, Sarah, my night nurse said, her voice tight. But the phones are out. I can't even call upstairs. The hairs on my arms prickled. Power outages happen, sure, but losing internal communication? That was new. I was checking on the chest pain patient when I heard a crash from the far hallway, the one that led to the ambulance bay. I glanced at Sarah. Was anyone back there? She shook her head. I grabbed a flashlight from the supply cart and headed down the hallway. The beam cut through the dim light, bouncing off the metal gurneys lined against the wall. The crash had come from the storage room. The door was open. Inside, one of the supply shelves had toppled over, boxes scattered across the floor, but no one was there. I crouched to pick up a box and froze. The door to the ambulance bay, the heavy steel one that's supposed to be locked, was ajar. just enough for a cold draft to seep in. I shut it, threw the bolt, and hurried back to the ER. A few minutes later, Sarah came over whispering, "One of the patients is gone." It was the woman waiting for stitches. She'd been in bed 4. Now the bed was empty, curtain pulled, halfway closed. We searched the ER, the hallways, even the bathrooms. Nothing. She wouldn't have just walked out, Sarah said, not with the snow like it is. I tried to think logically. Maybe she left against medical advice. Maybe she got scared in the blackout. But something about the open ambulance bay door gnawed at me. We locked every exit we could, just in case. At 2-3 a.m., the second patient disappeared, the teenager. 1 minute he was on his phone, the next, gone. His bed was still warm. That's when I told Sarah to stay with the remaining patient while I checked the halls again. My flashlight flickered as I passed the storage room, the same one I'd been in earlier. This time, the door to the ambulance bay was open again. I was about to shut it when I heard movement outside, soft crunches in the snow. I edged closer, listening. There were voices, low, urgent. "Hurry before." The rest was muffled by the wind. I stepped outside far enough to see 2 figures in dark coats moving toward the tree line behind the hospital. Between them, they were carrying someone, limp, head lolling. I shouted, but they didn't even look back. I ran after them, slipping in the snow, my flashlight beam jerking wildly. One of them turned, and I caught a glimpse of his face, pale, eyes fixed on me in a way that made my stomach twist. They moved faster than seemed possible, disappearing into the trees with the person still between them. By the time security finally arrived, delayed because their radios were down too, there was no sign of anyone, no footprints, no drag marks, just untouched snow. The police filed a report, but I never heard if they found anything. 3 weeks later, a nurse from another small hospital told me they'd had a blackout too, and 2 patients vanished that night. I don't work night shifts anymore, because I know that if the lights go out again, someone will. I wasn't supposed to be there alone. The job posting said 2 guards per night, but when I showed up at the government construction site for my first midnight to 8 a.m. shift, the supervisor just shrugged and said the other guy called out. "It's a quiet site," he told me. "Nothing happens out here. Just do your rounds, keep the gates locked, and radio me if there's trouble." Then he left, taking the only working truck with him. The place was 30 miles outside of town, surrounded by chain link topped with razor wire. It wasn't finished yet, a cluster of half-built concrete buildings, rebar sticking up like skeleton fingers. Rumor was it was going to be some kind of research facility, though nobody would say what kind. The security shack sat at the only entrance. Inside I had a desk, an ancient space heater, a radio, and a bank of monitors showing grainy black and white feeds from cameras around the site. By 1 a.m., I'd done 2 rounds on foot. Cold wind came down from the hills, rattling loose sheets of metal. Every step crunched on gravel. My flashlight beam caught nothing but shadows. I was back in the shack, sipping lukewarm coffee, when one of the monitors flickered. Camera 7, north perimeter fence. For a second, the image glitched, lines running across the screen. Then it cleared, and I saw movement. Someone was standing just inside the fence. I leaned forward, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light. But no, there was a figure in dark clothing, hood up, facing the camera. They didn't move, didn't even shift their weight. I grabbed the radio and called the supervisor. Static. Tried again. More static. By the time I looked back, the figure was gone. I told myself it was nothing, maybe just a shadow moving when the wind hit the fence, but I still decided to check it out. When I got to the north fence, there was nothing there. Just a patch of gravel and the hum of the security lights. I walked the fence line, my breath puffing in the cold, and found something that made my stomach tighten. A section of wire had been clipped, the ends curled back neatly, big enough for someone to slip through. I called into the radio again. Still dead. As I headed back toward the shack, I caught a flicker of movement inside one of the unfinished buildings, the one we called Block C. It didn't have doors yet, just a wide opening like a mouth. I told myself to be smart, to wait, but the job was to secure the site. So I went in. Block C smelled of wet concrete. My flashlight beam swept across stacks of plywood, coiled extension cords, and piles of cinder blocks. That's when I heard it, faint, echoing footsteps. Not mine. I froze, listening. They stopped too. I swept the light toward the far corner. Empty. Then something clattered behind me, metal hitting concrete. I spun around. A wrench lay on the floor where there hadn't been one before. The hair on my neck stood up. I backed toward the exit, keeping the light moving. That's when I saw him, just for a split second, reflected in the shiny surface of a metal cabinet. Someone was standing directly behind me. I turned fast, but there was no one there. I got out of Block C as fast as I could without outright running. Back at the shack, the monitors were all flickering now, one by one going black. Camera 3 froze on an image that made my blood run cold. The inside of the shack itself, as if someone had mounted a camera in the corner I hadn't noticed before. And in that frozen image, standing right behind the chair I'd just been sitting in, was a tall figure in dark clothes. I didn't even grab my stuff. I went straight for the gate, unlocked it, and walked down the highway until sunrise. I quit the next day. 2 weeks later, I saw a job posting for the site again. Same position, same hours, but now it said 3 guards per night. No explanation, and no names for the 2 who went missing before I ever started.